Nerds, we are talking about episode 1 and 2 of The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power. We're going to give our reviews of the episodes and then get into a breakdown of the episodes starting now. Welcome to the Nerd Soul Show. I am Nathan.
And I'm Colin.
I'm Priya.
Hey, so as you guys may know, Amazon released the Rings of Power on Thursday. It is a prequel to the movies. When we get into this, Priya can tell you a lot more about this because Priya is the resident expert. But we're going to start with our general thoughts about the first two episodes, our reviews of the first two episodes, and then we'll get into breaking down the episodes. So, Priya, what did you think of episode 1 and 2 of The Rings of Power?
Yeah, so that's a lot of pressure to be called a Tolkien expert because I'm sure there's a lot more people out there who are way more into the lore. But look, I'm a big Tolkien fan, read all the books, love the movies. And I have to say, I think the show comes with so much expectation because we know of the budget that it involves and it had so much hype. So I think the show does a good job in giving what we think is going to happen in the sense of giving these vistas that we're familiar with from the movies of New Zealand, seeing lots of different kind of, even though it's different locations, it's reminiscent of Middle Earth. And so I think it does a great job at evoking the feeling of being back in Middle Earth, even though it's set thousands and thousands of years before The Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. I think there's obviously pluses and minuses of the show, and we can talk about this as I'm sure it'll come up because we've seen it so much in the media. I actually really enjoyed the diversity of the cast, and I think it adds a really interesting dimension to fantasy in general because we rarely get to see persons of color in fantasy. So I think it's a really interesting thing, especially in a Tolkien-esque world, because the way he wrote it is like English mythology, and the way we've seen it depicted to date has been predominantly white or Caucasian actors. So I think it was just really interesting to see persons of color in the cast and adding that dimension to the narrative. So the story is not based on Tolkien, right? It's based on kind of the appendix from the Lord of the Rings books, and it draws upon like Silmarillion and different aspects. So I think overall, I'm curious to see what they're going to do over the next 6 episodes. I think it was a lot of world building and a lot of kind of set up. And I know before we recorded, we started talking a little bit about the pacing. So I think, but yeah, I'm going to be positive and say I'm really excited about the show because I am a fan, but I do see there could be things that they could do to improve, especially on the pacing.
Colin, what do you think?
Yeah, so I actually have to admit that I fell asleep in the first episode. I actually did. So I apologize for all the Tolkien fans out there. And I think that for me, I've always had some mixed feelings about the lore. I love Lord of the Rings, the original Lord of the Rings. They were epic. They are probably one of the best movies of all time. Bought the extended editions of Lord of the Rings, watched the whole 4-hour Return of the King cut. So it's still a very fascinating, interesting world of good and evil that I liked during my time when it first came out. The Hobbit series wasn't necessarily that. I think I watched it a few months ago. I just stopped at the second one. I was like, this is way drawn out too long. And I think that they tend to try to draw these things out. And I think that instead of just telling the story and just going through the story, they're not doing a good job of, they're just trying to extend it for as long as possible for people. And I think that people are going to lose interest if that is the case. As Priya said, I hope I'm wrong about this. There were definitely some scenes that just slow as heck. And I just wanted to make sure that they just quicken the pace so that we get to the story. And I know that with Tolkien it's hard because you have to tell a very detailed story. It's very detailed, it's high, but it was compelling. In Lord of the Rings, every single part of the extended edition was compelling to me. I really liked the lore. There was one scene from, I think it was from Fellowship, where they were talking about how Galadriel gifted all the Fellowship. And so that was like that was really cool. That was a deleted scene, but it was really cool to see it in the extended cut. And so that's like compelling stuff. That's not like something that is more dialogue or anything like that. It did add to the story, but in the theatrical, it could be cut in the theatrical version. So overall, they just need to be very careful about their editing and making sure that you don't lose people along the way.
Yeah, I think I'm probably in the middle between the two of you guys. I didn't fall asleep during the first episode, so I guess there's that. But I did I did find the first episode less enjoyable than the second episode. I like Colin, am not a Tolkien like devotee like Priya. I came to Tolkien through the movies. Although I have to say, in the early parts of my 20s, I would say that those movies were like my favorite movies of all time. I had to think about whether or not that's still the case. I do have the extended editions of those movies as well. I've watched them several times all the way through. Even did like day marathons where I would watch the extended edition in a day. So I appreciate those movies. But yeah, I try to watch the Hobbit movies because I like those movies so much. But yeah, I think that the reason that you could have an extended edition of the Lord of the Rings and it still be interesting is because he's pulling from a very long book. Whereas with The Hobbit, you're pulling from a very small book, and he was just stretching and stretching. So it got a little annoying after a while in that trilogy. Trying to make The Hobbit a trilogy was probably ridiculous and unnecessary. And I'm feeling, hopefully they find a mix so that it doesn't end up like The Hobbit, because people just get bored and lose interest. I will say it is getting better. Like the second episode is better than the first episode. The first episode is a bunch of beautiful scenery and people talking longer than they need to get across the point that they need to in those scenes. It's a lot of setup. But it looks like there is at least some momentum in the second episode. A little bit of spoiler here. The dwarfs show up in the second episode. They always liven up the proceedings, at least from my perspective of like only being knowledgeable of the movies. I know Priya was telling me before that Tolkien actually didn't write about them very much, but the dwarves were the comic relief inside of the Peter Jackson movies. And they're carrying that over into this show. So they made the second episode much better than it would have been if they were not there. And also not just we'll get into this when we get into the spoiler stuff, but it was the second episode of it. It's promising, and of course I'm going to continue to watch because I'm interested to see where things are going. But I feel like besides the two dwarf characters, Durin and his wife, I don't know if anyone else pops for me in the cast. I appreciate the diversity of the cast, and his wife is played by a black woman, but no one else really pops besides those two characters for me right now. I think everyone is doing an okay job, but those are the only two who pop. And to a certain extent, like Elrond, or is it Elrond? I forget it's the
Elrond, yeah.
But yeah,
The elf that goes.
that might be he's in the same room as them, so it's hard for me to tell. Yeah, so I'm looking forward to the next couple episodes, but I'd really give the first episode I can't give it lower than a 6 because they spent a lot of money on that episode. You can see it. You can see where the money was spent. So giving it lower than a 6 would dishonor all the work that the graphics and the set dressers and everything did, but the writing staff let them down in that episode. But the second episode, I give it a solid 7.5. So yeah, that's what I think about those two episodes.
And I will say that, so just based on what you were saying, because the first episode is so much setup, and it really goes through really fast of what his book, The Silmarillion, was about. So to your point, Colin, the showrunners are basing this off of not really set up material by Tolkien. They're using the atmosphere that he created in these appendices and in these prequel books that he wrote and then his son wrote, but it's not based on actual content he wrote. So that's why for me it's the second episode. I agree with you, Nathan, because I think the first episode is so much as a setup and telling fans and Tolkienites this is not going to be about the Silmarillion, because we covered that in the first 15-20 minutes of episode 1, and this is the story that's after, because otherwise people are going to do exactly what happened with The Hobbit, which is you compare it, you have these feelings, and you think it's just drawn out. So I also think the first episode is a lot of setup, and the second episode at least things start to go in the direction. You'll see that, oh, sorry, that might be a bit of a spoiler, so we'll go into that later, but they're setting up, the title is called Rings of Power, so we know that's the ultimate thing is going to be about the creation of the rings, and so in the second episode, it already moves that part of the storyline. We already see, okay, that's being set up. So yeah, I think I'll be very interested once we get some of this noise around the diversity of the cast. I'll be really curious to see the true Tolkien files and how they view this once there's a few more episodes. But yeah, I think I agree with you on the popping of the characters, and I just think dwarves are amazing. I love them, and I love the fact that The Hobbit was so much about them, but otherwise, yeah, elves get all the love. Elves get all the love.
Yeah. All right. If you guys don't have anything else, I think we can jump into some of the spoiler breaking down the episode. I would say if you're enjoying the conversation, please share, and subscribe. It helps the channel out. We really appreciate it. And with that, spoilers ahead. All right, so this was 2 hours of television. We don't have screenshots for everything, but we do have some things here. If we start actually with Galadriel and you probably can. I'm gonna butcher the name of where she is. So
Valinor? Is it Valinor?
Valinor.
Yeah.
Valinor. So we start with her as a child, and Valinor before. Apparently, this is before the first sunrise. The light of this place is not coming from the sun; it's coming from this tree. Apparently, that Morgoth destroys and takes the light away. Yeah, this is an interesting setup. This is stuff that I didn't know that I guess is covered in Silmarillion. I don't know if she's a child in Silmarillion, but like the tree and stuff like that, I think is probably covered in Silmarillion. I don't know if this is she a child in this in that book, or is she
She comes later. Like, she is mentioned in when the elves leave Valinor to go to Middle Earth. She is part of one of the families that goes, but she's not as central as the show makes her at the beginning.
Okay.
But I'm assuming she must have been a child, because at creation, which is when these trees were created, first pillars were created, then trees were created. She must have been a child at that point in time, yeah.
Yeah, and so they set up very well her reverence for her brother and their relationship here, and also that she's an outsider because the other elves are picking on her, which is weird, especially since the way that the elves are portrayed in Peter Jackson's movies. You'd think they were all like above it, but I guess children are children anywhere. So yeah, this is where all the light is coming from. There's no sun, and then this dies because Morgoth kills it, and then that's what sends him to war. I do appreciate the maps.
Yes, I love the maps. Love it.
Maps are awesome.
Love
the
visual.
maps are
Yeah.
Yeah, and these. It's funny. The maps they even spent money on the maps because the maps here actually look more expensive than the maps that you have in the Game of Thrones movie. The visual here. So yeah, the Sundering Sea. Is this how they get to from? Can you explain this to me, Priya? Is this supposed to be all on the same planet? It doesn't seem like humans could ever sail to this place.
So this was like brushing up on all of the historic stuff with it. So the very kind of, I guess, 101 with Silmarillion. So essentially, yeah, so the god equivalent, Elu, kind of brings creation into beings, creates these angels called Valar. And then Morgoth is actually one of the Valars, and he wants to create for himself, but he's unable to. So he becomes that kind of outcast angel. Then the rest of the angels capture him, chain him, and they chain him, put him away, and then they create this Valinor, which is the paradise for elves. So elves, dwarves, and men have been created during this creation, but only elves are awake. So the men and the dwarves are still sleeping at this time. So elves are awake. They live in this paradise called Valinor, and essentially these pillars are created for light. But Morgoth, actually, before he gets chained, he destroys the pillars, so that's why he gets chained. And so instead they create these trees, which are what you see here. And then what happens is one of the elves who is awake, living in Valinor, creates these jewels that are able to capture the light of the tree. But then Morgoth convinces the other angels that he's reformed. He's obviously not. Steals the jewels, goes off to Middle Earth. And then it's actually that king with the jewels who convinces a bunch of elves to go retrieve the jewels. So it's not, the way they set it up here is very like, no, Morgoth is bad and he is evil, so we have to go and fight him. Whereas Silmarillion, it's like, he stole the jewels with the trees of light, so we need to go get the jewels back.
So that's what this is supposed to be depicting. He's stealing the jewels. Okay, so
he does. So actually, he does destroy the trees using a giant spider. They didn't do any of that stuff. So it's all like there, but I think like the motivation of them leaving Valinor to go to Middle Earth, here it's much more like dramatic and for war and honor, versus in the Tolkien text it was like, we need to get these jewels back because they're the only things that remain with the light of the tree because the trees were destroyed.
Okay.
But at this point, so at this point, men and dwarves are sleeping. They're not awake. They don't exist yet on the planet. Only elves are actually awake. So that's why you only see elves until the war, and then it's a 1,000-year war, and during that time men wake up during the war, and that's why later on they say, oh, these men were actually loyal to Morgoth because they woke up during the war already and they chose sides.
I see. So the angels are not elves, but they're like, but the angels created the elves, the dwarves, and the humans. And what about the Harfoots? Are they not? They don't exist at this point, or the hobbits don't exist at this point.
I don't think they exist at this point because at least I don't think they actually even hobbits show up until his book, The Hobbit. I don't even think they're even mentioned.
But the Harfoots is supposed to be a precursor to
the precursor.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So as you said, the social scenes from this centuries-long war, and this is, again, you can see where they spent some of the money here, because this is really impressive. These scenes are really impressive up close up, but they also get impressive when you zoom out as well. Very Peter Jackson.
Yeah.
It's been the early 2000s is when that was done. You can actually see more detail here than when you zoomed out of those scenes. So yeah, and then I guess she's an adult now, because this has been going on for centuries, and a lot of dead elves. And this is where Sauron joins the conversation, or the story, because he's apparently a foot soldier or a lieutenant to Morgoth. So Morgoth is
And just another point, it said, remember the Balrog from Fellowship? Balrog of Morgoth, right? Okay, that's the same. It's the same Morgoth.
Apparently,
he actually makes a bunch of Balrogs. Like,
apparently, one is supposed to show up in the show later on. So okay, yeah.
Balrog has to be my favorite character ever. So awesome. It just chill. Yeah.
Yeah. And then we see her take up his cause and become very obsessive about it.
In this scene, you could really tell that she's very obsessive about it, but also like how driven she is as a young person. And then you see the other side of it when in the movies, you're like, she's such a pacifist. Like, what? Why are you not getting involved? She's been existing for like thousands and thousands of years, so she's whatever. Another squabble.
I noticed that as well. I also like the parallel that the Lord of the Rings movies start with Galadriel giving you the commentary and doing setup, and they would do exactly the same in the show here. But I thought exactly the same thing, Colin. I'm like, man, like Kate Blanchett's get was so at peace.
I don't even care anymore. It's like, I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna go retire and leave and whatever with the other elves. Yeah, you can join me, Elrond. It's fine, but whatever. It's let them fight it. And yeah, it's very interesting to see that shift when you're young, you're idealistic. You're like, let's go after them. Let's go after evil. And then it's, there's evil. Who cares? No big deal.
Is the difference between being 1,000 years old and several thousand years old?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah. So yeah, this chamber stuff is interesting. Some of the visuals in here were really cool. I've seen people like complain about this action scene that's coming up with the snow troll, that they spotlight her as someone who's doesn't need anyone, and everyone else just stands by. Like she's, I don't know. I don't want to use Mary Sue because it's what people would like to say, but I don't know if that's necessarily the case. Because first of all, I think there are also some female elves here as well that also get trounced. It's not just a bunch of guys that are just standing there. I think it's hard to tell how old elves are, right? These are all adults, but these adults could be like 50 years old and she's like 1,000 years old, so maybe that's why she's more skilled than they are. So yeah,
it's possible. It was like 1,000-year-old war, and her brother left when she was a kid, and so now the war is over, so technically she's probably like 1,000 years old already.
Right. Yeah. And these elves might have, and I think some of these elves have never seen, unlike her, has never seen Valinor, or maybe they were born in Middle Earth, so they have a completely different perspective than she does. Yeah. But this scene is cool. Although it was she ran up this sword a little weightlessly. I think that's the only part of this scene that was a little weird to me. They could have staged that a little bit better. But other than that, the scene was cool. It showed her skill.
It was trying to set her up as, okay, Galadriel's a badass. It's a different
different, yeah.
It's the fighting kind of badass Galadriel. So yeah. And then we finally get the money shot.
Yeah. So where is this? The Wilderlands east of
Anduin. I actually have no idea. I have never heard about it.
So what do you...
Is that the village with the...
It's not even a village, because I think the Harfoots, unlike the Hobbits, are...
Oh, the Harfoots, okay.
The Harfoots, unlike the Hobbits, are supposed to be like nomads. So it's their encampment. It's where they are now.
Okay, the Harfoots, okay.
Yeah, this is the intro to the Harfoots, yeah. They're hiding from these two villagers.
Yeah, and they're surprised that there were humans around at all. I think is this the elder of the...
Yep,
yeah.
He is the elder, yep.
Yeah, then we switch back to Elrond. Elrond. This exchange was interesting, because he's obviously has some sort of position, like high position within their society. However, he apparently isn't an elf lord, because he wasn't allowed to go to some sort of session. So again, I think you can correct me if I'm wrong. Was he born in Middle Earth as opposed to Galadriel, who was born?
I think he was, because he is younger than her. So I think he's actually one of those. But I think he's in half elf, which might be why
I heard it.
So I think his history is men and elf. So I don't know whether that's the reason why he isn't part of this, like the kind of inside court. Maybe, I don't know if that's why that's the case in the story, but that would be my guess, is because he's not like 100% elf.
So that's interesting, because later on we hear about like twice in history elves and humans tried to bond, people died. So apparently not everyone died if he's human.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's
Yeah.
why he was so animated about Arwen. But
Yeah.
makes sense now. Oh, you should not go with Aragorn. It's like, yeah, but come on,
I think he also had a twin brother who tries to get with a human, so he was already scarred by that whole
trauma.
family thing too.
Yeah.
So then, yeah.
Yeah, I think I remember this a little bit. His twin brother also gave up his immortality.
Oh.
Like his.
That's why he was so taken when Arwen wanted to do it too,
Yeah.
because he was already hurt by his brother.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
So we're in Lindor, which is the capital of the High Elves. All this stuff you can again see where the money went. This is beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah.
And I think this looks like it might be CGI, but it also could just be a bigature as well. It just could be a miniature that they have swooping over because there's a lot of detail here. So yeah.
And I know the first season they did shoot in New Zealand, so they're moving to the UK after the first season, but the first season was like during the pandemic they shot exclusively in New Zealand, so it's probably a mix of similar to what Peter Jackson did.
Yeah, yeah. You can tell that they're very close, but also that she's very committed to her mission, and he's also trying to put her straight about defying the king. So that the scene is interesting. We haven't seen her reconnect with him later on when she gives up this gift. That conversation should be interesting.
Oh.
Yeah. So I don't know. So like again, Priya, you're the expert here. Is it very rare for them to go back to Valinor? Because he's acting like this is like something that hasn't been bestowed upon anyone. Maybe because they wanted to make sure that the evil was rooted out, so no one had been able to go back. Is that the case?
Well, a lot of them left. That's the thing. So like in the original text, when that king is trying to convince the other tribes of the elves to go to Middle Earth to fight Morgoth, he actually kills off one of the tribes. I don't know how he manages that, but he kills off one of the tribes and he convinces pretty much a lot of the elves remaining to travel with him. So there's, to my understanding, not that many elves left in Valinor. So it is like the untouched kind of paradise in a way, which is where they're going back towards.
Okay.
So why are they trying to ask these guys to go? Is it just because, oh, you deserve it? We fought more for centuries. Now it's your chance to go to Valinor. Is that kind of reason?
It's like you get to live out in paradise because you've paid your debt to Middle Earth and you've paid your debt to our kind of elven people. So now go live out in paradise the rest of your days.
Got it.
Yeah, and she doesn't appreciate this gift. This is a very long scene, which I only have a few screenshots from. She doesn't appreciate the gift. This could have been a 2-minute scene. This is a point of earlier on. This went on way too long. But yeah, and the upshot of the next scene is when we're introduced to another elf. So how do you pronounce this? Arondir. Yeah. So he fancies the apothecary in this town. You also see that they really hate elves, the humans, because the posts like that he has here. So have the elves just stayed here to keep the humans in check because they sided with Margaret?
Exactly.
So,
yeah.
So they don't trust them, basically. Interesting.
His son has one of the blades. It's kept one of the blades for himself. So it's necessary, I would say, if you have that in your possession.
Yeah.
Because up until now, it was only like when we just saw that ceremony, they hadn't declared the war to be over. So they were just overlooking these lands. One, yes, Nathan, because I think he says it later where the men in this land actually sided with Morgoth. Yeah. And because the war wasn't over, they were like, if Sauron does come back, he's probably going to try and get these men to be allied with him again.
Yeah, but to this kid is annoying, but he makes a good point. It was like 1,000 years ago. Their lifespans are not nearly as long as elves. Yeah. So the allegiance that they had to this Morgoth is really only through the elves telling them this. It's not like anyone is alive who would remember this. Yeah.
Good point. Yeah, so these are new characters completely. And so that's why I was saying earlier, I am glad at least, I think with Wheel of Time they did this as well, where it's fantasy shows where you're trying to have more diverse cast, and we were saying with the Harfoot, I always want to call them Harfeet, with the Harfoot, that one of the biggest critics online is saying, oh, the elder is a black man, but it's also like actually called a Harfoot with browner skin because they were nomads and they were traveling all the time. So it's always this interesting kind of thing where people are online are like, Hulk wrote English mythology, and and English people were not diverse. It's like this just odd kind of expectation people have.
I don't know what this. I guess the point of this here is that the cow was corrupted, just like everyone else here. And you see the, I think the Colin, this is what you were talking about.
Yep, the blade.
Sauron's blade. Yes, he has this blade, but I feel like he doesn't know what the blade is. He doesn't know what that symbol is, because there's no one alive who knows what that symbol is. No human alive that knows what that symbol is. But yeah,
I missed this when I was actually watching the show. Do we know whose farm that is that he stole? Is it just like Farmer Joe?
This is his mother's. This is his mother's. He's just rooting around in her stuff.
So it's her.
Yes.
So it is. Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, and also the fact that like I think that when the elf wanted to find out the place that was attacked through the cows, east, and then basically she's, oh yeah, I have friends.
I used to live there. Yeah, I used to live there. Good people. Yeah.
Like they had some sort of like situation going, but then she told him, oh yeah, I basically have friends there, and it's like and he's, oh, it's an evil place, and I'm like, oh, that adds some drama there between the two of them. It's interesting.
Yeah, this speaks to what you were talking about, Priya. This is I guess the point of this entire show. You only get a hint here that this guy is going to forge the rings of power. Basically, the show is going to be showing the prologue of the original trilogy, the stuff that
the nine, what Galadriel was talking about was
in the first episode. Yeah,
with the rings. Yep, and then Sauron producing the ring of power for himself. Yep.
Yeah. So we get the lead up in this show, the rings of power actually being created.
Oh, now they're trying to actually create the place to even create it. So that's what Celeborn shows up and he's, I need to create this forge. So we're talking about pacing. Wonder how long this is going to take, because right now they haven't even built the thing, let alone talk about.
This is going a lot slower than House of the Dragon, where they're skipping like months and then they're skipping like years at a time. Yeah. We'll see if there's any time jumps in this show. Yeah, so they come upon the town. It's burnt, basically. The Southlands is, I think, where they were.
Yep, Southland. Yep.
That's where a lot of the men folk are. Okay. Southlands.
All right, and then we go to the Sundering Sea, and this is where she basically decides. Oh,
this was also a really long sequence. Yeah. I'm like, all right,
get to the point.
This is unnecessarily long. That's why I only took. That's why I only took the screenshot of what's important here. What her brother actually said to her that we got in the beginning of the episode. There's no way to know until you touch the darkness. Sometimes, so that's when she makes the decision. Yeah, this is overlong, and it's unnecessarily overlong. Yeah, but then we see things starting to rot. We also get in. I skipped over this, but like the king is ending the war, sending her and else into the other warriors into Valinor, but he also knows that Sauron is out there.
Yeah.
And
let's just sweep it under the rug.
I think his reasoning, I don't know, might have been sound to him. Like just speaking its name is bringing it up as opposed to just letting it lie. Is basically his explanation. But yeah, and then I watched the 2 episodes. I have no idea what's going on with this dude. He's obviously not a human. I don't know what he is. Do you know who he is?
I think I have an idea.
So they purposely have kept it really in the dark, but like the 2 theories are Gandalf or Sauron. Those are the 2 theories. They could go either way so far.
You mean Sauron?
No, Sauron.
Oh, Sauron. Okay.
I think it's probably more. So my understanding is that those wizards aren't going to exist for another 1,000 years. So this could be. I think it's
wizards exist. So wizards already were created.
Okay.
In the sense they were called like Myers or something like that, and they've already been created, but not in the way that we know them. If that makes sense.
Okay.
So this is probably like. If this is a like wizard, which is
proto Gandalf, I guess. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
So maybe it's Gandalf, maybe it's Sauron. Okay. All right. Interesting.
Or Saruman. I actually didn't think about Saruman, but I guess it could be because he has like evil in him too. So maybe.
In the story, Saruman was not evil in the beginning. He was not evil at all, and then he just got corrupted through the trilogy. So it possibly could be Saruman as well. Or I was just thinking Gandalf because of his affinity for the halflings. So and the fireworks. They made a big about it in the original trilogy of him putting up fireworks and stuff. So there were a lot of pyrotechnics stuff involved in the end of this episode and also in the second episode. So it made me to believe that it could be Gandalf because of that.
Yeah. And then all the Firefly talking to the moths. I was like, okay, this might be Gandalf. And Gandalf is such a beloved character. Mm-hmm. It almost seems like a lost opportunity for a show like this to not somehow bring him in because they do have freedom of content. Yeah. I was leaning it's more likely to be like a Gandalf character before he obviously becomes the Gandalf we know, but a version of him.
I see. That'd be cool.
So we'll see. We'll see if that's true. But right now they're call him the stranger
Yeah,
everywhere.
it's
So
like that whole storyline. I wanna like Nori in which, but it's a whole lot of nothing. It's a whole lot of nothing. Nothing's happening there, and it's unclear what's happening there or why it's important. And she wants to wander, but her whole tribe wanders, but she wants to wander in a different place, a different way than everyone else.
But she was meant to have. She was meant to find him. She's meant to find him, and it's like fate. So that's her purpose. She has a purpose now.
Okay.
I'm with you, Nathan. I'm like, I know why they're doing this, and I'm like, I want to like it, but every time they cut to that, I'm like, okay, let's go, let's move. But hopefully it'll get better.
Hopefully. Hopefully.
I also no, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, because the Hobbits everyone else is interesting, but the original movies are about the Hobbits, and it's not boring, even though it's about the Hobbits, even though they're not the most powerful. But every time they cut to them, the Harfoots, it's not interesting to me. So
yeah, I was also reading online. There was an article in the Guardian about, and they summarized everything, all the controversies around Rings of Power, and 4 out of 5 of them were about people being racist. And apparently, one of the issues was the fact that the Harfoots are portrayed as like very stereotyped. All of them have Irish accents, and there's a lot of issues apparently in how they're being portrayed as well. I didn't read into it. I can't claim to know a lot about it, but it was just interesting how many controversies there are around the show, even though it was watched by 25 million people. It's just interesting of like how much publicity it's getting for negative things too.
Yeah. As I said earlier when we did the reviews, the interesting part of this starts when they get to Khazad-dûm, and it's actually cool to see Khazad-dûm not like an abandoned spooky place, like actually bustling like this. Yeah, this challenge of theirs, it was fun. It just added a bunch of like liveliness to the episodes, which were all like very solemn and very people sitting around and talking in a very serious tone. It added like joviality to the episode. So yeah.
I agree, and I loved seeing Khazad-dûm because even in the original Lord of the Rings trilogy, like Gimli talks up Moria so much, and then by the time we get there, it's like overrun by goblins. So it was just, we hear so much in the movies and the stories about the amazing kind of opulence of dwarves, and it was just so cool to finally get to see it in Khazad-dûm. Like they have spent a lot of money in just creating that feeling of these sets. They're amazing, and I love the dwarves. That entire dwarf sequence, I was like, I just love an episode just set in Khazad-dûm. Dora and Disa.
Yeah, they have a lot of attention to detail for the set decorators, the CGI folks, but even like the way that they set up this, the attention to detail where the archways are, even for a tall dwarf, is probably a little bit too short for. Also, he has to dip underneath of it. It's great. It's great. I want to spend more time.
Agreed.
Want to spend more time here. You saw an overhead shot here of the great elevator and everything. So yeah, he's pouring out his grievances here. That so dwarves have normal lifespans like humans, or are they longer lived than the humans?
I think they're longer than men. Yeah, but they do live longer than men, but not as long as elves. Because I think Bilbo was like 111 years old, and I think he was even older. But like they age. But yeah, I do think they live older. Except that's a separate. And it will come in the show, they talk about Numenor, which is where Aragorn's lineage family is from. Yeah. They're there because the Valor, the angels, create Numenor after the war to gift it to men. So we'll see it in the show. I think we'll probably see it in the 3rd episode. And there, it's men from Numenor do have a longer kind of life. That's why I think Aragorn in the books is like 90 or something.
He's old in the trilogy.
It looks great for his age.
For a human.
For a human.
Yeah, so like I said, the Durin banter with his wife, this whole conversation, it's just fun. So good stuff. Even the conversation about how they courted each other. This guy, I don't know how long he's going to be part of this show. He seemed less than honorable. He kind of ditched all the people.
Did he say that he was from the South? I think he did. He said his people from the Southland, so they're like the Morgoth people. Like they're loyal to... Yeah.
If anything, it might be going to that same town that these guys went to.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah, and this is the last time we see him in this episode. He's pulled back. I don't think I have this. Yeah, he's pulled back into the thing. This also, fighting the orc was also a highlight of this episode. It also shows like just how strong an individual orc is. Like you need a couple people. You need a couple people just to take down one. So the entire town running is probably the best course of action. Like they don't have the numbers or the strength to take down like more than a couple of these guys. So it's prudent that they flee.
It definitely makes you appreciate the fight with the orcs in the original. You definitely appreciate the Fellowship's ability to fight the orcs after you just see this scene as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
It seems that they also decided to go. So I guess they could have made everything slightly different if they wanted to differentiate it. But I think they're going with the same sort of aesthetic. Like the here look like the orc in the Peter Jackson movies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they are elves that have been darkened, so I
Yeah.
think they have that elvish look.
Is that what they are? Is that what they are actually?
Yeah, it's like corrupted elves.
Corrupted
like
elves, yeah.
Morgoth essentially took these elves and he darkened and corrupted their souls.
Okay.
Which is what Saruman does later.
Okay. I know that's what happens in the. So I was actually surprised to see orcs in this show because I thought that Saruman creates them like later on. But
No,
I guess
Saruman. No, so the orcs are like they've been around for a while, but Saruman he created the Urukai. They're like the different types. They can walk through sunlight or march through sunlight. Yeah, that's the difference.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like
so
modified,
yeah, that's true. He created the Urkai, but yeah, Morgoth created the Balrogs, the dragons that you see, the orcs, and so essentially at the end of the war, they defeat Morgoth, and Saruman is still around, and the orcs are still around. They don't get rid of the orcs. So right now, the dark forces are essentially orcs and Saruman somewhere, some Balrogs.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. And apparently the Dwarven King and his son are hiding something here, and we don't see what they're hiding. But I guess we'll see the other shoe to drop at some point here.
I thought it was the Arkenstone, but I don't know because that is also Durin. I don't know. This is Durin 4. I don't know what Durin it's later who creates like the Arkenstone stuff, but that's what I thought it was.
This wouldn't be
Just
from the
because
Hobbit.
This wouldn't be. No, it's one of the great grandfathers of that Durin.
Okay, all right. Maybe it seems to glow, so maybe.
That's the only reason I was like that white light gives me those vibes, but who knows?
Yeah, and we also see the Saruman's sword recreating itself from the blood of man. So, like I said, there's a lot of potential threads here, especially at the end of the second episode. Which, even though the first episode was really slow, will have me tuning into the third episode later on this week. And I don't know who this is, and I guess we'll find out next week. And this is.
It might be Isildur, actually. That's what I've heard, because I think he's supposed to be like a sailor, and he takes her to Numenor because that's where they are, possibly.
Really?
Possibly.
You mean the guy?
Remind me, who's Isildur?
Isildur is he's the guy who got corrupted with the ring.
He's the one who essentially cut off Sauron's fingers.
Yes.
Aragorn, like ancestor who defeated Sauron.
I mean, if it was I know who you're talking about. I would think the rings will take quite a long time to actually create, though. I would expect that they're going to take like at least another 100 years or so to create. So I don't think he would be like alive yet.
I know that was my suspicion too, but he's in the casting. That's why I was like,
that's weird though.
I did not think I had the same suspicion. I was like, I didn't think Isildur would be alive now, unless his dad's name is also Isildur. I don't know, but he is a character in the casting, which is what made me think. And he's pictured on boats and stuff.
Well, the other thing could be that what Nathan was talking about is time jump. They could do the time jump, and then they have a rings of power, and then he could be in possession of that, or toward the end, because of that, he's the one who cut off the fingers of Sauron. So it's possible that it might allude to that.
Time
jump, or even like a prediction to the future.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Yeah, that might be more likely because I had that initial thing too. I'm like, he would be very old.
Yes, he would. Yeah.
If he shows up at this point in time, even if time and age is so relative right now.
And he's supposed to be like a regular human, not like a human. What's his name? The king. I'm forgetting. He's not a human. He's not a long-lived human. And he's supposed to be like a regular human. Yeah.
But his ancestry is then also from Numenor, which is one of these longer lived. Yeah. And the only reason that I'm saying him, I think that's where the third episode is going. To me, I think that's where she lands up, is this island of Numenor, which is this kind of haven for men. So I think that's where she ends up. Now, whether or not that's Isildur, I guess we'll wait to see.
Okay, that's where it ends. Whoever that is, I guess we'll see next week, as you said. So, like I said, I'm looking forward to the next episode just because they have enough seeds now, except for the Harfoot thing. I don't know what that's called.
Gandalf is going to make it much more compelling.
After Gandalf, yes, it'll be much more interesting. But I'm rolling my eyes every time we go there because it's not interesting right now. But hopefully it gets more interesting. But everything else, every other plot point, with the dwarves, with creating the forge, whatever's happening to I forget the guy, the elf that's in the sewer. whatever's happening with him, the village people, all that stuff is interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing where that stuff is going. Anyway, guys, any final thoughts before we close out?
I don't think so. Looking forward to the next episode.
Yeah, that is what we think, but we are interested to hear what you guys think. So comment down below, like, share, and subscribe, and we will see you next time. All right, guys. Thanks. Bye.